So here we are, class 7, working bees and spring management. So the next class is on summer, fall, and winter. And then the last class is on products of the hive. And Janice is going to be helping me with that because she's got a lot of experience with products of the hive. And after that, we can, if you like, we can do some special kinds of classes. So for example, I've had really good luck overwintering in nukes, and so maybe we could get Doug Vinson to come and talk to us about doing overwintering in nukes. So we could do some mini kinds of things. So if there's things you want to do going forward, let me know and we can certainly do that. And also, um, if you'd like to be a guest poster on my website and share your experience about what's happening as you get bees, let me know because I would love to have some guest posting and we can figure out how to do that. Um, so today we're going to be starting with actually getting in the hive and actually working with the bees. But before you ever even go to your bee yard, there's a couple of things you really need to think about. A big one is how's the weather. So you don't want it to be too windy. Here in Greensboro today, the wind was, 15 to 18 miles an hour and gusting to the low 20s. That's too windy for the bees. It's really hard for them if you've got the hive open. And you want it to be at least over 55 degrees. You want it to be sunny or at least partially sunny. So as you're looking at the frames, you've got enough light. It's like reading in the dark, really. So you really want to make sure there's enough sunlight that you can see what's happening in the frames. You want to pick a time of day when when most of the foragers are out, and typically that's between 10 and 2 or a little bit later. The foragers are sort of the guard bees and the grumpy bees, and they're the ones that are more likely to sting and more likely to be buzzing in your face and to do headbutting. Bees headbutt when they want you to stop doing things, and so that's not uncommon to have bees coming at you. And a weather app is really helpful, and I use a weather app called Dark Sky and also the Weather Underground, which is wonderground.com. And the reason that I do that is I actually schedule when I'm going to be in my bees based on when I'm available and when the weather's available. So I keep saying that with bees, it's animal husbandry. You've got to make hay while the sun shines. And so typically this time of the week, as we're figuring out what our week's going to look like, I'm looking at the weather, and the weather apps also tell me what the wind's going to be like and how much sunshine and those kinds of things. So I try to find a good time that I can be in the bees based on the weather, and I sort of schedule my week around the bees as much as I can. So that's one thing. Don't go out if it's raining. A little bit of drizzle isn't really too bad, but really you don't want to be out in the rain. You don't want to be in the cold. You don't want to be windy. Those will not make happy or healthy bees. And you got to know why you're going before you go. So know what the purpose of the inspection is. Um, if it's this time of year, we're looking for evidence of queen, we're looking at brood pattern, we're looking at the health of the brood, we're looking to see that we've got all stages of the brood because that'll tell us if they're getting ready to swarm or not. We're looking at space use because we're starting to get enough food coming in that they're bringing in food and space is being used up quickly. We're looking at, do we need to add food to them? Do we need to supplement food? Or even, pollen. We were looking at evidence of pests and diseases. So it may be that you're going to just go and you're going to do a sugar shake and check on the status of the varroa. And you need to be prepared for the unusual. So, I keep talking about the quote about keeping bees is easy, just like raising children is easy. There are times when I think I'm going to do a quickie through the hives and be in and out in an hour. I've got 5 hives now, and thinking that I'm going to be able to get in and out quickly. And I open a hive and there's something serious going on. And now I've got to be moving equipment and doing whatever. And, it becomes a bigger deal. So you've got to be prepared for that. I remember one year in early spring, I had a hive that was doing great. It was thriving. It looked really good. It had lots of space. The next time I went and checked it, there were no bees in there. And I was just so dumbfounded by the whole thing that I just closed it all up and came back the next day. So you just never know what you're going to find. So you got to be prepared for anything. You got to know what you're going to be doing. And when I say be prepared, you've really got to be prepared before you open a hive. You've got to have your smoker ready. That means lit and with fuel that's not going to burn the bees or singe the bees. You have to have your hive tools ready. I say tools because I usually have two, because I'll put one down and then I won't be able to find it. So I have a backup, and then eventually I will find it. Protective gear, including glasses if you need them. And you don't even have to be that old to really need magnifying glasses to be able to see in the frames. And a sweatband if it's over 70 degrees. And I'm test driving something new. Usually I just do a bandana or something, because if it's sweaty and you're getting sweat in your eyes, that's not good. Your glasses start to move off of your face, and it's just not a good thing. My niece is in the medical field, and one of her friends has been making these skull caps like they wear in surgery. And so I've been test driving some of those, and those are working out pretty well. So if you're interested, I'm probably going to do a post about those at some point in time. So, and they're pretty because she does them on all these different things. You're going to need something to put debris in. So sometimes we're cleaning up burr comb or propolis, or whatever other bigger trash you don't want hanging around the bee yard. So you need something to put that in. You need water for yourself if you're going to be there for more than, well, if it's really hot, you're probably going to need it if you're even there for half an hour. But also some of the smokers don't have guards on them, and they can actually burn the grass, and you may need it. As I always have water with me just in case of sparks or whatever. And your cell phone. And I just was in the bee yard, what day was that? Friday? Yeah. And I forgot my cell phone. So, make sure you have your cell phone. And more about the smoker. So you want to use fuel that burns cool. So I typically use some kind of pine needles or pine shavings, or some aspen or something like that. You can use newspaper or cardboard or something like that to get it started, but as a fuel for the bees, it's not good standalone. It probably has some kind of chemical in it, but you don't want things that are going to spark, because those will singe the wings of the bees, and that's just not a good thing. I use, this is a cardboard egg carton, and I just rip pieces off and I use that to help start. So that's just something I do. And you should practice starting it and keeping it going before you inspect your bees. When I do mentoring, I do mentoring through Forsyth Bee School. And the first thing we do is we all practice starting our smokers and keeping them going. And then you also have to have a plan for what you're going to do with the smoker once you're done, because you're going to have burning fuel in there, and you don't want to put that in your car. People have burned up their vehicles that way. And so, for example, what I do is I have a little galvanized bucket that I keep in the car, and I dump the ashes in there, and then I always have water, and I mix it up, and I make sure that it's cooled down and everything. And then some people also get metal, like trash cans with lids, even after it's emptied, and they put it in there and they put the lid on it. And so those are things that you can do, but you need to make a plan for what you're going to do with what's left of the burning fuel when you're done. And so those are things that you need to think about with smokers. And if you're sending in questions, if you could send them to everybody, because I can't see if you're sending to me.
It says I saw where someone used cotton jean material for a smoker.
Yeah, you can use cotton jean material, anything cotton, anything that's not synthetic you can use. Cotton burlap is really good. There's just lots of stuff you can use for fuel if it's natural. You don't want to use anything synthetic. You can actually buy cotton. It's kind of like the stuff that they get from like dryer lint is what it looks like. And you can use some of that. You can use wood pallets. There's lots of different things. Try them out, see what works for you. You want it to be a cool smoke. If you see sparks coming out, that's not going to work. And you want to make sure it's natural, so there's no kind of chemical things. So like anything with polyester in it or anything like that has fumes that'll kill your bees or hurt your bees.
Wine cork for the smoker.
A wine cork, yeah. I do use a wine cork. I've whittled it down to fit in the end of the smoker so that when I'm done, and I do that, and then it goes in the trunk, so that even if there's a little bit of whatever going on, and also my car smells like barbecue a lot of the time because of the smoke. So those are also things you can do. And we lived in Texas for a while, so I appreciate the smell of barbecue and smoke. So anyway, so as we get into the hive, the first thing you want to do is you want to smoke the entrance, and you just want to kind of do a puff of smoke. Remember when we talked about the pheromones, we talked about the guard bees, when they start to see and feel the vibration of something going on, they're going to start to put off an alarm pheromone, and then the bees are going to get stirred up. So the smoke will help cover that up. And then you can also lift the top cover and put a little bit of smoke in there and give them about 30 seconds before you actually go back in. So it gives them a chance, when they smell the smoke, they think fire, and so they're going to start eating honey, and they're easier to work with. If they've got honey in their bellies, they're less likely to sting that way. So you're going to do that. And I actually go around and smoke the entrance of all the hives in my bee yard before I even open one hive. And the reason I do that is all the bees will become a little bit defensive and taking care of their own homes, and they're less likely to come out and start robbing and bothering the hive that's open. So I kind of do that. Um, you always want to, when you're working in the bees, you always want to stand behind them or on the side of the hive. You never want to be working your bees from in front of them. Think of it as a flight path. You wouldn't stand in the flight of a plane coming in. You really don't want to do that with the bees either. And make sure you know where you're going to put your equipment. So, because we're going to be taking equipment off and we're going to be putting it down, and then we're going to be putting it back on. And so figure out where you're going to do that so you're not tripping over it. And figure out where your work area is going to be. And this is my bee yard, and I do the hives with space in the middle, so I always have place to put equipment down in the middle. And the reason that I do that is because then I don't have to bend all the way down to the ground to be lifting things up off of them. So, just figure out what you're going to do. A lot of people just really do put things down on the ground, or they have tables or other things around. So figure out where your work area is before you begin. So the first thing we're going to do, and I'm going to run through all these different things, and then I actually have a video of me doing an inspection from this week, and so and it's about 6 minutes, and I'll play that, so you get to see some of this in action. And of course, I just want to say this is what I do. Every beekeeper develops their own techniques for doing things, and the bees will adapt to the beekeeper. So you'll figure out what works for you. So the first thing we do after, so we've smoked them and now they know we're coming. So we're going to remove the outer cover. And this is if you have a telescoping outer cover, or if you even just have a regular moving outer cover. We're going to remove it and we're going to set it off to the side. And I put it upside down between the hives, next to the hive that I'm working on. And I'm going to use it as kind of a catch-all. So what I'm going to do is I take hive bodies off, I'm going to set it on top of that. That way, if the queen's in there and she comes out, I'm not like letting her loose in the grass. I don't have a lot of bees in the grass. If you have a lot of bees in the grass, they'll be crawling up your pant legs. That's not a good thing. So I use that as kind of the catch-all for whatever's coming out of the hive bodies. Then you're going to remove the inner cover, and you can prop it up in front of the hive so the bees can walk back up and get in the door, or you could put it on the side, but you just really don't want to block the entrance. And I usually do that. So here's a picture. I've just sort of propped it up in front. You can see the bees are headed up, so they're going up into it. And next to it, you can see that I've got my outer cover upside down, and then I'm putting the hive bodies on top, and I'm sort of putting them at an angle so they're not just stacked up. That way they don't stick, and we'll talk about that in a second too. And then you could put it on the side so they walk up and they get onto the hive body, and then they'll walk around and get into the entrance. You can do either of those things. So, okay, now we're preparing to inspect. So if you're going in during a big nectar flow and you're checking for space, so we have big nectar flows in the spring and the fall, and typically when the tulip poplars are blooming in the spring, or in the fall here it's asters and goldenrod. You can actually start at the top. You don't really need to go all the way down. You're primarily, you're going to be looking to see, do they have enough space? Should I add another hive body or super? If you're checking this time of year, if you're checking for the brood and the queen health, you really want to be starting down in the brood boxes. So that means just take the top supers off to start with and then go to wherever there's going to be brood. And so I take those off and I stack them on top of the outer cover and I stagger them so that they don't stick together. The less contact where they touch, the less stickiness you're going to get because they've put so much propolis in there that they'll adhere. And then, you know, when you're trying to get them back apart, you're going to be jarring the bees and the bees will be annoyed. Can you get the timer going for me? And you might, the timer.
Oh,
You might consider using the inner cover to protect the bees in the stack that are on there. So once the inner cover's been in front of the hive and the bees have kind of walked up and there's not many bees, then what I do is I'll just put it over top of the 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 hive bodies that I'm not working on. It gives them a little bit of extra protection. They're not just so exposed. In the book, she talks about covering them with like a robbing blanket or something like that. I just use the inner cover and that works out pretty well. You're going to use puffs of smoke to move the bees around, but you really don't want to over smoke them because that'll make them grumpy. And we do want to move them around enough because we don't want to be squishing them. Every time you will kill some bees. It's really hard to work in Langstroth hives without killing bees. But you don't want to over smoke them and you don't want to squish them. And every time you squish a bee and the poop comes out, the inside bees have to clean that up. And if there's any kind of diseases or anything in there, then you're kind of spreading it around. So we really try to minimize that as much as we can. Then what you want to do before you start just ripping frames out, first of all, you want to move slowly. So if you've ever seen anybody doing Qigong where they're moving kind of slow and even, that's the kind of movement you really want to do. And so the first thing you want to do is you want to make room. And when you're first learning to work in the hives, what you want to do is you want to just physically take a frame out. So then you have lots of room that you can move frames around in. And usually it's the frame furthest away from the cluster. When you're looking down on the bees, you'll see that they kind of cluster in a specific area. And it's usually one of the end ones that's furthest away. So you take that out and you can either prop it up next to the hive or sometimes I'll just lay it on top of the stack, just, you know, depending on how many bees are there or whatever. As you'll see, more experienced beekeepers can make space and be able to gently pull it out without taking a chance of rolling the queen. So if there's not enough space and you're pulling out, the queen can get smushed and she can like get damage to her legs or her antennas or, you know, other parts of her body. So you really don't want to do that. And so if you're just learning to work with the bees, start by, you know, give yourself some space so that you don't take a chance. It's, you know, queens are not inexpensive. They're right now about $35 for a typical Italian hygienic. So, you know, just don't do that. And like I said, move slowly and smoothly as you can. If you have enough space, you can loosen frames before you pull them out. If you don't have a chance to do that, they're kind of sticky and you might like jerk it. And if the queen's on there, you might send her flying. So be careful about doing that. And it's best if you can and do the inspection as you're looking at the frame over the open hive body, because if the queen does come off, she'll go back in with the other bees and you won't end up losing her in the grass or, you know, whatever, stepping on her. Those kinds of things can happen. That's not uncommon. And one thing you have to remember is when the bees build the cell, they build them where they're tipped up just a little bit. If you think about it, if they were straight and there was runny water, watery nectar in it, it could run out. And so they actually have a little bit of a rise to them. And so when you're looking at the frame, you may have to tip it a little bit to be able to see in there. So keep that in mind. When you're looking at a frame, you want to have the sun behind you. Think of it as like a reading light, right? So, and you can move the frame to where you can actually see in and the light's coming in. Now, if you're working with a Langstroth frame, you can move them around pretty much. If you're working with a top bar that doesn't have four sides, you're going to have to be really careful about how you're handling it. Because if you start to do this, where you're bending it, the wax will start to bend if it's new wax. So you have to be careful about that. So we want to have the sun behind us. And don't forget the magnifying glasses, and they're good for all ages. Trust me on this, especially if the comb's been used a few times for brood and now it's a little bit darker, it's a little bit harder to see. When you start, you may want to look at each frame in the box, and you can do that. Just go quickly. We really want to spend no more than about 15 minutes in the hive, except for special cases. So we don't really want to be disrupting that for very long, especially during a nectar flow, because it could take the bees a day to get back to normal, and it'll interfere with their ability to process nectar, and that'll affect your nectar flow. So you want to be a little bit careful about that. And you also want to be, as you're looking at the frame, you're saying, you know, is this a brood frame? Is this a one with pollen? Is it one that has nectar and honey on it? You know, so we're kind of judging what they are as we're looking at them. If it's a frame that has, you know, nectar and honey, you may go, oh, that's interesting, and then put it back in, and then go to the next one. If you're, you know, if we're looking for queen health and brood health, then you'll go to the next one. And so you may go through a few, but when you get to where you're looking for and you see what you need to see, then you know, we can just be done and put everything back together and be done. If it's a brood frame, the things you're going to be asking yourself, are you seeing cap brood or open brood? And we've talked about this before when we were talking about the life cycle of the bees. So the cap brood, they're in the pupal stage. Question?
Just try to put the frames back in the order they came out.
Yeah, that's in here. Yeah. So so if it's a brood frame, are you seeing cap brood that is in the, you know, and what kind? You know, is it all drones? Is it all workers? So they're in the pupal stage. Are you seeing open brood? Are you seeing eggs? Are you seeing larvae? Is the cap brood pretty solid, or does it look like it's scattershot? And I'll show you a picture of the difference. And remember that hygienic bees will remove unhealthy brood. So you have to have, so you might see a few little open spots, but that's really okay. If you see a lot, then there's something going on. Are you seeing uncapped brood? And what stages are they in? You know, are you seeing eggs? Are you seeing really little larvae? Are you only seeing big larvae? If you're only seeing big larvae and you're not seeing little or eggs, that could be, you know, an issue. So this is what hygienic brood looks like. You see there's a few little holes. They just will pull out, you know, if they can sense that there's something going on with the pupa, and so they'll pull it out. And so there'll just be a hole, but in general, it'll be beautiful and solid like this. If it looks like this, scattershot, that's a problem. There's something else going on. And that's where we go back to the pest and the maladies and the pesticides and things like that to figure out what's going on with them. With open brood, this is, you know, these are larvae and eggs, so that's what those look like. And so those are the kinds of things you're looking for. Do you see the queen? If she's marked, it's easier to find her. Somebody that I mentored who was either a kindergarten teacher or first grade teacher, she had her daughter in the bee yard with us, and she was trying to show her the queen, and she said, she moves like she owns the place. And it really is the best description of the queen. You can tell that she moves differently. She's bigger, she's shinier, she kind of shows up. And if there's a lot of bees on the frame, you can give them a little puff of smoke to get them off so that you can look. You can, you know, use your hive tool and, you know, kind of move them out of the way. You can brush them off. You can, you know, do lots of things. I gently blow on them to kind of get them out of the way. But during swarm season, you don't, you know, some people will do this with they'll do a quick shake with the frame to get the bees off of it before they actually physically take it out. You really want to be careful if you want to keep your queen cells during swarm season, because if you shake it, her head is down toward the end. So here's a picture of, if you can see, this is a queen from one of my hives. She's on a frame. There's not a lot of bees, but she's down in the bottom right. Can you see her down there? She's shiny, she's longer. Her wings don't quite go for the whole length of her body. So that's what a queen looks like. And she moves pretty quick, and she moves around. She'll head up she'll start heading up toward the bar. You'll see the bees, if she starts to get sedentary where she's not moving a lot, they'll start to cluster around her like a flower because they're going to be, you know, cleaning her and feeding her and taking care of her. But you'll see the bees will kind of follow her. And so you can kind of follow the bees. And here's a queen cell. So if you imagine shaking that and she's in there with her head down at the bottom, you know, you can hurt her and damage her. So if you really want to if you want to protect the queen cells that you might have, don't be shaking them during swarm season. So you might want to, you know, brush them off or do something else. And you know, think about when was the last time you were in the hive. So if you were in the hive a week ago, 7 days ago, you wouldn't expect to see egg, and you would expect to still see eggs and small larvae plus capped larvae, unless you killed the queen when you were in there the last time. So one evidence that the queen is still in there and you haven't done anything from the last time is if you see eggs and small larvae. If you look in this picture, these are big larvae. They're probably close to 7 days old, and then there's cap brood. It's possible that if this is all you're seeing, you might have hurt the queen or killed the queen since the last time you were in there. So you're looking for evidence of the queen since you were in there last. And as long as you find evidence of the queen and everything smells good, you kind of can be done and put things back. And you have to remember, look at how pearly white and kind of glossy these larvae are. That's the way larvae should look. If they don't look like that, there's something going on. You're probably smelling things that don't smell right either. So those are things you need to know. You do want to put the frames back into the same position they came in, unless you're doing something like checkerboarding, which we talked about last time, or if you're replacing frames for some reason, like, you know, you want to say you're doing a split or something, which we'll talk about in a minute. And one of the ways to be able to make sure you put them in the same way is if you mark the tops of the frames to track wax age or something, that can be helpful. Some people just put marks on them, or you can just, once you get kind of the flow, you'll take the frame out, you'll look at it, you'll look at the other side, you'll put it back in. So you'll develop a rhythm. I actually mark my frame, the tops of my frames. So the numbers are the year that they built wax on them. And then I also mark, like the W means it's crimped wire. Some of them have paint sticks, some of them have plastic, some of them have, there's not very many plastic left though. There's some of them that have cut comb, you know, different things. So I kind of want to know what's in them. That's been helpful over the years. And then the MD or the M is that it's a medium depth, because sometimes I put mediums in deeps because I'm using that for drone culling for the Varroa controls, or because that's just what I happen to have available at the moment and I need to get more frames ready. Or, you know, I might put shallows in a medium or something like that. So it's really it's been helpful for me to be able to track those things. Use a little smoke to move the bees out of the way as you put everything back together. Putting boxes back on is the best way to squish bees. And we all squish some, but the fewer the better. And as you're putting things back together, you may want to clean up some of the propolis or the burr comb as you go. And make sure you have a container to put it in. It's not a good idea to leave that debris in the bee yard. It'll attract predators, maybe depending on where they are. If it's at your home, you're probably not going to worry as much about predators. So here's somebody who's scraping burr comb off the top of the frames, and they'll do a lot of propolis like between the ends of the frames where they touch each other at the very ends. And sometimes, you know, just cleaning that stuff up as you go is a good thing to do. I do leave a little bit of burr comb because it helps them move between the levels, but I don't leave a lot. And sometimes if they don't have enough space, they may start actually just building comb and laying eggs in it. And that stuff I usually clean up too, because then what will happen is the boxes are harder to get apart. So that's something that you'll want to do. So this is from the book, and it talks about all the different things. So you can see that she's got she's got the outer cover actually on the ground, but, you know, flipped over. And then she's got boxes stacked on top, and she's stacking them a different way. She's got a robbing cloth to keep them safe. She's got the inner cover propped up onto the side of the hives stand so that they can walk up and walk onto the, across onto the board. She's got a frame that she's removed actually on the front so the bees can walk up and get in. And then she talks about examining the frames and how you're looking at them and then looking at the reverse side. So those are all the basics of what we've been talking about here. And then this is my video, and this takes about 6 minutes. So okay, so when I go in, I usually start with the bottom, and then if I need to go up, I'll go up. But one of the things you need to do is you need to make sure you allow space so that the you don't roll the queen. So if you see, the bees are more localized on this side. So I'm going to start by removing one frame so that I can have some space. And I'm going to take it from as far away from that middle cluster as I can get it. And some people just, they just pull out frames. This is one of my 3-sided frames. Don't try this at home. I'm going to just lay it up there. And then what I'm going to do is, these guys tend to be, these are buckfast, and they tend to be a little surlier. So they're building on this frame. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do some checkerboarding because I moved them from a nuke into this box about a week ago. And so I'm gonna do some checkerboarding, which means I'm gonna move these frames that they haven't been building on between the ones that they have been building on. And what I'm looking for today is, make sure they have enough room, evidence of the queen, and queen cells for swarms. So this has got a lot of honey on it, or nectar on it. So I'm moving it to the edge. They can just take care of that over there. So it's going to be on the far end. And then I'm going to do this one with just foundation. They had started to build on it, but not a lot. So I just moved it in. And I'm not really smoking them because they're not so bad. But again, I'm looking at brood patterns. So this is also, the buckfast are also hygienic. So there's a few places where they've pulled out brood that wasn't healthy, and now they're putting nectar in it. So one of the things I'll do today is I'm gonna give them some more space because they're moving at a pretty quick clip. But you can see this is the pretty brood pattern. So, and I don't know if they've requeened or not. I'm going to see if I see her. She, if it's the original queen, she's got a blue dot on her. Last year was blue, so this year's white. Okay, so one of the things I want to point out here is this brood pattern. I'm just blowing on the bees so you can see it better. There's a few holes in it, but these are hygienic bees, so they're going to clean it out, but they're also putting nectar in there. So that's one of the things. And then here to the right, you see that's a swarm cell. I'm not seeing anything in the swarm cells yet, but I am seeing a lot more drones, and drones are the first indication that they're thinking about swarming. So I'm thinking about splitting this one in about a week or so. Once I start to see queen cells developing, I will split this one. And what I'll do is I'll move the old queen out. So I'm going to back it up and then I'll show you. So the sun is behind me, and what I'm gonna do to inspect this is I'm looking for first of all, I'm looking at the cap brood to see what it looks like. And the fact that it's so solid like that's a good sign. That means that the queen's still doing well. But I'm also looking for indication. I haven't seen the queen yet, so I'm looking for indication of the queen. And so I'm seeing a lot of nectar, but I'm also seeing, this is where the glasses come in. So all of the cells tip up just a little bit. So you really have to move the frame to be able to see into the frame. And what I'm seeing is, I'm not seeing any eggs, but I am seeing really young larvae. So that have just hatched in the last probably a couple of days. Oh, I'm seeing eggs way down here in the bottom. So one of the things that happens is she kind of starts in the middle and lays and works her way out. So if you just sort of find the bigger larva and start to move out, you'll be able to see. And then what I'm going to do to get to the other side is I'm just going to roll it. See, there's a lot of bees on here. And I just blow gently to get them out of the way. I'm seeing a lot of nectar in the cells, and that's probably part of that is because they're bringing in so much. And so the queen may be becoming nectar bound or honey bound. And so I need to make sure that there's enough space for them to bring in and have a place to put the nectar, and for her to be able to have a place to lay. The fact that they're laying where, or they're putting nectar where she's laying, is kind of a warning for me. And like I said, I'm seeing queen cells, swarm cells. There's one here. Can you see that? But when I open it, I'm not seeing anything in it. So they haven't started. She hasn't started to lay to make a new queen yet. So that's interesting. Okay, so this is one of my three-sided frames. So they've been building down, and so this one I've got to handle more like you would a top bar, and so I have to be very careful about how I manhandle it because it'll get kind of floppy. So what I'm doing is the sun's behind me, and I'm holding it up high enough that I can actually see in the cells. And one of the things that I'm seeing is a swarm cell, and lots of drone brood. So I'm going to see what's happening in here. See if there's anything in there. There's nothing in there, so that's good. So they're not quite ready to swarm yet, so that's really good. I'll be doing a split on this one. There's a lot of bees in. We have more questions.
Oh, how do you mark the queen?
Oh, we'll talk about marking queens maybe next time. There's markers for them, and that's one of the things we should really talk about too, is there's a color coding. And so last year was blue, and that was a 0 year. This year is white, it's a 1. And I can't remember exactly. Janice, do you remember, is 2 yellow?
No, I don't remember.
Okay, we'll look. Anyway, I'll check it out, and we'll include that next time. And there's different ways you can mark them. You can actually get little things that you can put them in, and you it moves them, and then there's like a little grid, and then you take the marker and put it through to mark their thorax. You're going to mark their thorax. Or you can just even take a piece of screening and kind of put it over her as she's on the frame, and then mark her. Some people have used nail polish. I mean, they do different things, but they actually do sell specific markers for marking queens. And so I'll next time I'll show some information about marking queens. And also I'll bring the thing that says this is the color. So it's green, yellow, white, blue, and red. So it just depends on, and it's, in 5 years. So that's kind of how we do it. Okay, early spring management. So I want to go through some of this stuff fairly quickly. So in the early spring, the first thing you're going to do in January is order your nukes, your packages, and your queens for spring, because that's when the suppliers typically start taking orders, and so you want to get in early so that you can get the early ones. And our early spring kind of begins in mid-January to February because our queens start actually laying usually about mid-January. So that's kind of what I consider kind of the part of our spring. So it's when the bees are actually coming out of winter. That's what I think of as spring. And so they start laying in mid-January, and sufficient food stores becomes really critical, because as they start to lay brood, and they'll just start with a little bit of brood. They won't like fill up a whole bunch of frames all at once. They'll start with just a little bit, but brood takes a lot of food. So lots of pollen and lots of nectar. So you really have to make sure they have sufficient food. And one of the things you can do is in January, you can check, well, all through the winter, really, you're checking hive weight. And one way to do that is to just pick it up from the bottom in the back and see how heavy it is. If you do that as they're going into winter and you have some sense of how heavy they are in the fall, it's a better comparison. So that doesn't really mean anything if you really haven't been through the fall. Um, and so during the winter, the bees are moving up. They're eating as they go, and so the remaining food is wherever the bees are. So there's probably empty boxes below. And if you add sugar candy or fondant, which is what I do, and it does a couple of things. It collects moisture for one thing, and I use fondant because it's already been inverted, and the bees can use it as energy faster. I can real quick on a fairly warm, above 45-degree day, I can quick open the box, look at the fondant, see if they're eating a lot of it, see how much of it's left. That gives me a clue of how they're doing and if they need more food. So then I can make sure that I'm continuing to keep them fed, making sure that they have a lot of food. Like I said, don't open the box when it's cold, and check the weather first. And then also at that time, I always say for Christmas, I always give my bees a pollen patty, because when they start laying in the middle of January, she's going to need pollen. And if they don't have enough stored pollen in the area where they are, they're not going to go down to get it. So they go up to get it, but they won't go down to get it. So that's one of those things. And don't feed liquid until the temps are above 55, because they can't really process it very well. And that can be a stress for the colony. If you're going to open the bees, do it midday to allow the bees time to recluster before the temperature drops at night. So you're going to be changing the temperature when you open the hive. You really want to do it, like at 2 or something. Remember, in January, it's still getting dark at, 6:30, 7 o'clock. So you really want to give them enough time to start to cluster. They don't cluster quickly. And that's been a big problem in keeping bees alive, is when the temperatures drop really fast, they can't cluster fast enough to really keep themselves warm. So you start to lose the ones on the outer shell. If you have extra honey that is safe, in other words, there wasn't any like American foul brood or anything really nasty in the honey. You can put that on the hive. You can either put the whole box on top of the hive, or you can pull out a couple of frames close to where the cluster is. And as I showed in the video, you can kind of see where the cluster is from where the bees are. So you can kind of pull out a couple frames and put some really close to the cluster. You might scratch it in a couple places so that it's already open. If they're really hungry, they can get to it and start eating it and start to get their energy back quickly. And you need to get in and out quickly. We're talking just 2 minutes or 3 minutes or something. I mean, really, really fast. You don't want to disturb the cluster at all, because they really need to be able to stay clustered to be able to stay warm. And they're going to need a lot of food, honey and pollen, when they start to actually build up. And we lose a lot of bees in February, because that's when we're building brood and they're eating a lot, and they'll go through 20 pounds of food in no time at all. So it's not going to be like the rest of the year. And once you start feeding them, you got to keep feeding them until there's enough nectar flow or something to be able to give them enough food to keep them going. Lost colonies in the winter. This is where you post that Dewey's thing.
Oh,
okay.
Yep.
So this is also in January on reasonable days, you can kind of tell if there's activity. If you pop it and you're not seeing bees, and you're kind of looking around and you're really not seeing bees, and you can tell that the hive is dead out. You may want to like get the equipment out of the apiary and get it, sealed up and everything. You don't want robbing. If there's honey still that's viable in it, you don't want that taken. You don't want wax moths, once it gets warmer, to come in and destroy your comb. So you may want to get it all sealed up. If there's lots of dead bees on like the bottom board or whatever, you want to get those out of there as much as possible, because they'll start to get moldy and they'll smell and they'll decompose, and it's just not pleasant. If there's a few dead bees in the cells, don't worry about them, because once they dry up, you can just like, bang on the thing and they'll come out. And you don't want to just leave remaining honey around to absorb the moisture and ferment. So you really want to get it off and get it somewhere where it can be protected. And you're also going to want to be looking at why the colonies died. And it could be for disease, it could be for mites, it could be too small of a population, it could be starvation. And John's going to be posting a handout that Dr. Dewey Karen shared. And it's for how you actually can do some forensic checking. And he just goes through a bunch of questions and asks different things. And it can help you identify why the colony didn't survive. Are you able to do that?
I'm trying to figure out how to find it in this state, but yes.
Okay, so we'll either do it now or I'll do it when we get down. So look for that to show up in chat. It'll be a PDF that you should be able to download.
I got it. Okay.
So he's doing it. Okay, so in spring management, like I said, we're monitoring the colony stores. Brood expansion is happening in mid January into February. And as fresh pollen becomes available, it'll really stimulate the brood rearing. And we lose a lot of hives in February to starvation because people go in and they look in January and they've still got, 20 pounds of honey on there and they think it's all fine. And the bees go through it so fast and there's so many more bees now and then they're dead. So that's a really, February is probably one of the most critical times in beekeeping. And our first big nectar flow comes from the silver and the red maples, mostly red maples in this area. And that's where, so you'll see me as I'm out and about, always looking up and looking for the red maples and the little fuzzy red, because that's an indication to me that my brood expansion is really going to take off and I've really got to start to pay attention. So the first warm day, it's got to be at least 55 degrees and sunny. You'll want to go in and do kind of a quick assessment of what's going on in there. Does it look like you still have a decent number of bees? Do they have food? Is everything looking pretty okay? In March is when things really start to take off. So if the temperatures are stabilizing where you're getting a bunch of days in like 55, we can do a little bit of stimulating the brood. So this is where we start to do this dance where, because our nectar flows are limited here in North Carolina, we want as many bees available to go out and bring back nectar and to make honey as possible. On the other hand, if we overstimulate them so there's too many foragers out there, we can create a swarming situation. So you have to remember that it takes 21 days to make a worker bee and then another probably 21 days until they're ready to forage. So you take those and you add them together, that's 42 days. And so if you want to make sure you have maximum number of those, if you start feeding them 1 to 2 sugar syrup, about that much time before we decide when the tulip poplars are going to start blooming, basically, you can end up with the maximum number of foragers available. When I say 1 to 2 sugar syrup, it's 1 cup of sugar to 2 cups of water. So it's a really light, it's 50% water. The other thing that you really will probably need to do to make sure that your hives have enough space is, since the queen's moved up, she may be laying right there. If you have a deep brood box or 2 deep brood boxes, they may be empty. So what you may have to do is reverse them and put wherever the queen is and the brood is down and put an empty box above her, because she'll just go up and lay. And so we get them to start moving up and down that way and taking advantage of space that way. So that becomes really important. And we don't ever want her to be honey bound as the nectar flow increases. But you need to be really careful when you're moving boxes around about splitting up the brood cluster, because if there aren't enough bees to keep the bees, if you split it, and so now we've got some below and then some up here, and the bees have got to like stay on all of them to keep them warm, you're going to end up with chilled broods on the end because they're not going to be able to do it, and that'll kill them. So that's one of the things. So here again this is like a normal colony, right? So we've got brood in the middle, and there's cap brood up above and regular brood, and then there's the pollen around it, and then around that and above is the honey. And queens typically, some queens will, but a lot of the queens won't cross the honey. We call that a honey barrier, and they won't cross that. They'll just stay wherever the brood is. So you've got to be really careful that you're not splitting up the brood area. You really want to keep it contiguous so the queen can move back and forth easily, and the workers can also maintain the temperature that they need to keep the brood viable. So that's one of the things you need to think about. And I'm going to talk about that in another minute, about something else that I'm going to be sharing. On a day when the temps are above, you can do some spring cleaning. We go in, we kind of clean up the bottom board. And if you have a screen bottom board where it's been closed up for winter, make sure that's opened up. You might switch the entrance reducer to a bigger opening. You might add some fresh frames, clean up some burr comb and propolis, and maybe get rid of some of the equipment they're not using at this point in time. So there's some basic house spring cleaning we can do. Consider in late March, consider doing a sugar shake for the mite count. And the reason you might want to do that is if they need to be treated, you want to be able to treat them with something that'll work for that temperature, but won't affect the nectar flow that'll be coming up. And if you want to know the best thing to treat them with for the temperature and what can be used with nectar flow and whatever, go to the honeybeehealthcoalition.org/Varroa. And it is the best place in terms of being able to look at what's available for treating Varroa. So that's something that we need to do. It used to be that we didn't really need to worry about it until after nectar flow, but now we're at a point where we really need to do this early on. So that's also something that we're talking about. Nectar flow. So right now, the nectar flow is starting with the blackberries and the wild cherries and the black locust. Tulip poplar will be coming probably the end of this month. Black gum and other kinds of ground plants and trees will be blooming. So we tend to over super during the spring nectar. So we want to give them, when I say over super, it means you can give, this is the one time during this nectar flow that you can give them more equipment than they need, because they're going to be going through the equipment really, really fast. And they need lots of space to process the nectar, because 50% of that is water. And so they're going to be putting nectar all over the place and fanning to dry it out before they actually get it into the cell where as honey and where it can be capped. So you've got to make sure you give them a lot of space. So when you put a super on and you go back and you check in a week, if you put on a super that has all foundation and you come back and at least 80% of it has been built out or pretty much built out, add another one with foundation. If you're putting on supers that have drawn comb, when about half of it is full, put on another one, because they'll go through them really fast. They can go through, they can build out a frame during a heavy nectar flow in a day, or about a day, and then they're going to fill it really fast, and so they're going to be able to fill this stuff up really quick. And then there's something you'll hear called top supering or bottom supering. So you can either add a box on top and let them go up and add to it, or you can add a box on the bottom of the super. So brood box, super, this is where you'd put the new one, and then filled ones above it. And there's different reasons, and if in the book it talks about why you might do one or the other. It doesn't really affect the amount of honey that you have. It does kind of affect the amount of travel the bees have to do, and they're actually footprinting and carrying stuff with them, and so you end up with a little more debris in your honey. If you don't give them enough space, the queen won't have enough room to lay, and then you end up with this problem, which is called swarms, right? So swarming is natural. It's how bees in nature reproduce. But if your hive swarms before the big nectar flow, you've just lost half of your bees, and so you'll get less of a honey production. So this is one of those things that we have to be kind of careful about. And so managing this time of the year is one of the trickier parts. So some of the reasons that they'll swarm: congestion in the brood area. If the queen can't find a place to lay, that might trigger swarming prep. So reversing hive bodies can help with that. Poor ventilation, they can feel crowded. I'm sure with the one that I have that has full queen cells at this point in time, that's what it was, because I didn't move it into bigger equipment as soon as I would have last year, because I decided that this year, because all of the packages and the nukes were late, that everything that we were doing was probably late too, and my bees didn't read that, and they weren't on the same timeline. So they got to the point where they had already started swarm prep by the time I was able to move them into bigger equipment. And then some bees are just genetically, they just swarm more. That's just kind of what they do. So there's a bunch of reasons why they may do that, and that's just some of them. Um, so swarm prep, what it looks like is the first thing is they'll start to you'll start to see a lot more drones. Part of the whole thing is drones take longer than a queen, and so you want to make sure there's a lot of drones to get out in the air with all the other queens that are going to be mating at that point in time. And then you'll start to see queen cells start to appear, or even like emergency queen cells. So I was starting to see those cells that didn't have anything in it. That's part of the swarm prep. And there's a lot more, and they'll be generally on the bottoms of the frame or sometimes on the outer edges of the frames, which is where I was seeing some of mine. But there'll be a lot of them. It won't be just 3 or 4 or 5. It'll be more like a dozen over across a couple of frames. And you'll start to see larvae and royal jelly in those empty queen cups that we were looking at. They'll have, when you look in them, you'll see white milky stuff, and that means that they're already started the queen. And once that queen cup, once the queen cell is capped, this hive's going to swarm. It's to get them to not swarm is really hard, and there are a lot of things that we can try, but it's pretty hard to keep them from swarming. Um, once the once they get to the point where the queen cell is capped, it depends. It's changing, so it's not clear to me at this point in time. But the worker bees will start to feed the queen less, and the reason is that big old queen can't fly. So they've got to get her to stop laying and to lose weight so she can fly. So they'll start to reduce the amount of food, and you'll start to notice that the amount of brood goes down to the point where you may not see eggs anymore, or you may not see small larvae anymore. Although sometimes we do. We've had instances in the last few years where you go in and you'll see eggs that are a day old, but that hive has swarmed. They may be really close because the queen's not able to fly distance yet, but it swarmed anyway. So that can happen. And the workers are really trying to get her down to flying weight. So that's what they're doing by cutting off the amount of food that she has. Right before they leave, the worker bees will engorge themselves on honey because they've got to last for a couple of days without having more food. And they've also got to keep the queen alive. And so prior to the new queen starting to emerge from those cells, the queen and maybe a few drones and about 50 to 60% of the bees will leave the hive. And they'll generally go early in the day to midday, although not always. None of this is, like I said, they don't read the same books that we do. And they'll typically go to someplace fairly close by and start there as the scout bees start to go out to look for the new home. Or if the queen's not quite in flying shape, they may go there until she can have another day or so to where she can go a little bit further. So they're usually fairly close. And a lot of the bees that are leaving are the younger bees who are maybe a week or 10 days old because they need to be able to build wax for their new home. And so they've got to be the young bees that'll be able to build wax and that will have their wax glands able to engage. And we've been seeing swarms already. So that's one of the things is um, it's not too soon. And people have been getting swarm calls already. And it's not uncommon to have packages or nukes swarm within a short time, especially packages or nukes, because if the nukes are growing too fast for the nuke box, by the time you get it, they may have already started swarm prep. And it's not uncommon to see a package swarm or a nuke swarm fairly quickly. And then the other thing that we get is something that's called successive swarms. So they'll create some swarm cells and then they'll create some more swarm cells. And so they'll do one swarm and then the new swarm cells will, get to the queens will be ready to emerge and they'll swarm again. So that's not uncommon either. So, and the other thing that you should know is bees don't necessarily see frames with just foundation as space. So if you're starting to see swarm prep and you put a box that's just foundation on, they're not going to see that as space. They're going to just continue on with whatever they're doing. They really need to have drawn comb to see that as space. And you may want to do some checkerboarding and things to try to head off the swarming. Destroying the queen cells won't necessarily keep them from swarming, and they're really good at hiding queen cells. So, don't be surprised. And sometimes removing the old queen, typically what I'll do is I'll try to find the old queen and move her and some attendants and some food out into a nuke box. And then they think they've swarmed already, and I've been able to keep bees that way. Um, but that doesn't always work either. And finding her once they've started to get her size reduced is a lot harder. But swarm cells are a really good way to raise new queens for free, so we can take advantage of that. Checking hives every week to 10 days at this time of the year is helpful in managing swarms. That way we make sure we have enough, and also with the nectar flow and everything, we make sure we have enough equipment on them all the time and they have space and everything's going fine. And like I said, be on the lookout for successive swarms. If it swarms and you're in looking and you see more swarm cells, I'd be ripping those things out or pulling those out and creating new splits. There's a bunch of methods of swarm control. The Demare one is probably the most popular, but it's also really complicated. We're not going to talk about any of these. You can look them up. Some people clip the wings on the queen so the queen can't fly. That sometimes works. Sometimes the queen falls off the landing board and then gets eaten by something, and so you end up with a problem anyway. Sequestering the queen, they kind of do that with the Demare method and some other ways. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So one of the things you can do is you can take advantage of the swarm situation by splitting the hives and making more than one hive. And there's a couple different ways you can do splits. And if you do a split before the nectar flow, they generally do well because they got lots of food coming in, they can build up. You can end up with a really pretty good size hive pretty quickly. And so we're going to talk a little bit about doing splits. And there's a couple different methods. There's something called a walkaway split. I talked about if you do double deeps, where you have 2 deep brood boxes, those are really easy for doing walkaway splits. As long as there is nurse bees and eggs in both of those boxes, you just take one and you put it in, you put a new bottom board, you'll put some food with it, and you put a lid on it, and the other one has got about the same. And it doesn't matter where the queen is, because the one that doesn't have the queen has eggs, they'll build a new queen. So those are pretty much what walkaway splits are. And make sure that whatever you do, you make sure they have enough food, so honey and pollen. You can create a nuke with swarm cells. So that's one of the things I was doing. I pulled out some of the frames that had really pretty swarm cells that were already capped. And I also made sure there was a lot of nurse bees in there. I made sure they had a bunch of cap brood, because the cap brood will be emerging soon. The nurse bees won't be having to take care of the cap brood, so that's to their advantage. You don't have to have as many nurse bees. And they also had a bunch of food in there, and so that'll work fine. And I had to make sure that the queen wasn't on any of those frames. You could also create a nuke with frames of brood and food, and then you can just purchase the queen. This time of year, as packages are coming in, there's a lot of queens you can buy. And again, when you're pulling frames out to make a nuke, make sure that your old queen isn't in there, because when you add a new queen in, she'll just kill it. So one way to make sure that the queen isn't in there, and this is one of the things that I do, and I learned about this in one of the conferences, is you take an empty hive body that's deep enough to handle any frames you may be pulling out. So frames I was pulling out was 2 deeps and a couple of mediums and a shallow. Okay, so I had an empty deep box. And I also have my queen excluder, and you have to have a queen excluder for this. So what I do is I put those on the side. I go through my frames and I'm pulling out frames that I want to remove for the nuke. So I pulled out 2 frames from the deep that had queen cells in them, and I put them in the empty box I have over on the side. And then I pulled out other frames to make sure I had food and whatever. But I was also, before I pull them out, I start to pull them out and then I brush all the bees off of them. And I'm not shaking them because I don't want to shake those queen cells. So I get all the bees off of them. And it's really easy once you get most of the bees off to tell you don't have the queen. So I know there's nothing on this frame. I put it in the empty box. Go back and get the next one, and do that with 5. Put all the hive, and I'm putting empty frames in to fill in wherever I take them out. Put everything back together. Before I put in the inner cover, I put the queen excluder. Then I put the empty box with these 5 frames in it on top. Put the inner cover and the outer cover on top, and then go away for a few hours or a day. When you come back, the nurse bees have gone up to take care of all those things, but the queen couldn't get through the queen excluder. So now you've got a lot of good nurse bees. I know the queen's not in there. Take the top off, pull those frames out, put them in a neat box, move them, do whatever. Take the empty box off, take the queen excluder off. I'm ready to go. So that's all you got to do to make sure the queen's not in there. And that was one of the things I learned in the conference. Another reason to do conferences. The other thing you can do, and I'm almost done here, is you can also use, if you've got a really, really strong hive and one that's kind of limping, you can actually equalize across the colonies, so that the small colonies can become more productive. Colonies really need kind of a certain number of bees, a size, to where they can really move ahead. They kind of have this threshold. So just by adding a couple frames, sometimes you can get them over that threshold to where they're really take off. So if you're taking bees out of a really strong hive and they haven't started swarm prep, it's a way of keeping them from swarming. So that's also one of the things you can do. It also makes it easier to manage the rest of the year because you've got more equalized hives. So there's different ways you can do it. One thing you can do is if you've got a weak hive and a really strong hive, early in the day, swap them, because when the foragers come back, they're bringing food, so they'll be able to come in. And so they'll be going in, the foragers from the strong hive will go into the weak hive, and they'll be there to help them out and to take care of them. So that's one thing you can do. You can pull a few frames of cat brood from the strong hive, make sure the queen's not on it. If it's nurse bees typically don't fight when you put them in a new hive, but make sure that you've got, that hive doesn't have a varroa problem, because if you're putting cat brood from one hive into another hive, you could be setting a varroa problem loose. So you got to make sure you're doing good varroa control. And we do cat brood because, again, if there's not enough nurse bees in the weak hive, they don't have to do anything with cat brood, and they're going to have more nurse bees coming out soon. So it's a way of helping them out. The other thing you can do is you can merge weak hives, where you'll have to kill the queen in one of the hives if they're both queen, right? Or if it's a queenless hive, you can do this. And what you do is you basically just put a layer of newspaper on the top of the one hive, put the boxes on from the other hive on top. After you've killed the queen, you don't want two queens, put the lid back on it. The bees will eat through, but they'll start to smell each other, and they'll get used to each other before they actually get through the newspaper, and then you'll end up with a really strong hive. And then once they're all merged, you can go in and move things around and get brood back where it's in an area and stuff like that. So that's just general helping stuff you can do. The other things I'm going to be sharing is there's a beekeeper calendar that's really helpful. So it says in January, here's what you should be doing, and here's what's going to be blooming, and here's where the pollen's going to be coming from. And so here we use Dr. Buddy's calendar. Buddy Marter was with Forsyth. I think he still is, and he was one of the primary people in the certified naturally grown program with honeybees. And so it's, at least for this area, and it's kind of kept up to date. So I'm sharing that with you. Some method of tracking information for your bee yard is really important. So whether you do, log somewhere when you do requeening, when you do a split, when there's major flow on, when you do mite checks and what kind of treatment, all of that's really helpful. There's different, there's programs out there to do it. I just track in a Google Calendar, and for like when things are blooming in particular. So what I'll do is I have a Google Calendar that has a color specifically for my bees and plants. And so like I'll say, 2021 red maples blooming, and I'll make it recurring annually. And I just put it in as full day kind of thing. And then what I can do is I can look back over the years and I see the year, here's when red maple started to bloom. Oh yeah, this year we're 2 weeks behind where we were last year, those kinds of things. So that's kind of what I do, but you can do different things like that. I'm also sharing, Dr. Buddy also has a beekeeping techniques document that has a lot of really good information about checkerboarding and how you do, taking brood boxes and putting them up and, reversing them, and why what you need to look out for. It's a really good document. I asked him a couple years ago if I could share it, and he even made sure I had his most current one. So he knows that it's being shared out there, and it's pretty helpful. Next week we're doing summer management, fall management, and winter management. I'm a little over. Sorry